said yes! Congratulations! I'm Amina Lutfi. I'm a professional organizer, and I am passionate about wedding planning. Would you believe, you won't believe, all 3 of my children were married the same year. Not only that, I helped to organize all of those weddings, one of which was a destination wedding in Costa Rica. As a professional organizer, I learned a great deal about wedding planning. I'm going to share all of the details with you, the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the goods and the bads. I'm going to share every morsel with you. Stay tuned to the end because you could win a beautiful wedding journal that I personally designed. So today what we're going to talk about is booking your wedding venue. I have at least 25 critical questions you want to ask prior to actually signing that contract. Okay? So I have a lot of good information. So why don't we go ahead and get started with the information. All right. So now you said I do. And we know that saying I do is a pretty emotional time. Everyone wants to show their ring and calling their girlfriends and other significant others, their partners, or whoever's in their life and saying, hey, I am engaged, and they're really pretty excited about it. However, another emotional time too can be when you are actually starting to pay fees for various services, and one of them is actually paying for that wedding venue. Looking at the total cost for the average wedding in 2017, 2018, almost $34,000 for a good sized wedding, lots of guests, the venue, the food, all of the above. So I'm going to be sharing some tips with you that are really critical tips for actually securing that venue. Because we know that when you start planning your wedding, it can be very stressful in terms of actually securing the venue and doing all the things that you need to do in order to pull the wedding off, okay? And the wedding planning. Now, the thing about the wedding venue is you have to plan in advance. Oftentimes you will call them and they'll say, we were already booked for the whole year. We don't have any availability until next year. So that's one of the first things you want to do. Once you say I do, you want to start looking around for a suitable wedding venue. Because as I said, it can take up to a year, oftentimes if it's a really popular venue, to really get booked there. So make sure that you take care of that right away and start calling around and doing your homework. All right, so moving right along relative to what you should ask. So when you identify a venue that is probable for you, that you want to, possibility, you want to ask, first of all, do they have are the dates available for you, the days that you have in mind? The other one is you want to ask about the cost for the facility, for the venue. And you want to know, is there a down payment? Is there an installment plan? These are questions you want to ask. What's the refund policy? Cancellation policy? And are there other miscellaneous charges that you should be aware of? And the other question you want to ask, I have a whole series of questions for you, wonderful questions for you to ask. Before you sign the contract, when you're looking for your venue again, do you allow a courtesy hold on the venue? If so, what is your policy? Can I use my own wedding planner? The reason why you want to ask that is because some venues come with a wedding planner. And you can't bring in your own wedding planner. So that's something you want to ask. If you're looking to bring in your own wedding planner, you definitely want to ask that in advance. And if they're asking that you use their wedding planner, you want to find out, of course, what the fees are, what the scope of services are. Also, you want to find out from the facility, what's their maximum capacity? And can you use the facility for both your wedding and your reception? So these are some questions you want to ask when planning and selecting your venue. And we're talking about caterers now. Can you bring in your own caterer, or do they have a list of caterers, or do they have a pre-select caterer that you have to use if you're going to utilize that venue? That's a question that you want to ask. You may have a caterer in mind, but they may say, you can't bring in your own caterer. So that's a question you definitely want to ask. It's very important. And another question, say you want to come in and you want to really decorate the place and put balloons up or whatever else. Some venues have restrictions relative to you can't take this off the wall, you can't put pins in the wall, you can't put tape on the wall, and some facilities have a restriction about balloons, especially like I'm familiar with the Embassy Suites Hotel. I had a relationship with Embassy Suites Hotel as a consultant at one point, and individuals would hire. I'm giving you an example. They would rent a room, for example, for a reception, one of the rooms at the Embassy Suites. Well, a lot of them did not know that they could not bring in helium balloons. And I would see them coming from the car and they're all excited and they got this big bouquet of helium balloons, only to be turned away by the front desk because they're told we have a restriction for helium balloons. So you definitely want to know what are some of the restrictions, what you can and cannot do relative to decoration. That's really important. Okay, this is a big one, liquor. Now, is there a fee for corking the corkage, the liquor, if you can or cannot have liquor? Also, let's say you can have liquor, but is there a restriction? Is it only wine and beer, or can you have what is called hard liquor? You want to know that. Now, the other thing I want to share with you or ask you to be sure and ask the facility when you're looking at liquor is, do you have to have a liquor license? Some places require liquor license. You have to know what the county or wherever the governmental agency requires relative to if you're going to have hard liquor, especially, or serve liquor to guests, if you have to have a license. You want to be sure and get that understanding. Now, I have to tell you something really funny. When my youngest daughter decided to have a destination wedding in Costa Rica, Oronel, Costa Rica, I went with her. We went about 8 months in advance to talk with the facility and the awesome. He was actually awesome. I got to give a shout out to him. Oronel, Costa Rica resort was absolutely awesome. Arnan is the owner there, and we met with him prior, maybe about 6 to 8 months prior, and my daughter wanted to have, of course, a number of her friends come from the States, and when we were talking about liquor in terms of wedding planning, we asked, him how much would they charge, et cetera, and my daughter, so he said, well, what did you have in mind? She said, well, I think $50 per person, open bar. And I looked at her and I said to my daughter, I said, are you serious? She said, yeah, well, my friends, we're having this is going to be a very celebratory time and I don't want to put any restrictions on my friends. I said, well, $50 a person and we're talking about 75 individuals. Oh, let's rethink that. Anyway, I just wanted to add that. But you definitely want to get all that clear when you're planning your wedding and talking with the individuals who are in charge of the facility, the venue. All right, another good question you want to ask, is there a cake cutting fee? So you have this beautiful, let's imagine you have this big, beautiful wedding cake and you have the topper on the cake. Well, sometimes you can actually hire them to come to, because what will happen is the cake will be there for a while and everybody's looking at each other like, when are they going to cut the cake? Well, the facility sometimes will actually have someone there that knows how to cut the cake, because oftentimes the bride and groom want to save, I think, the top part of the cake, put it in the freezer, and maybe consume it for their anniversary. So you want to ask, is there a charge for cutting the cake? All right. Another question you want to ask is about the use of candles. Candles can be really quite awesome and set a really beautiful ambiance for the wedding. But the question is, does the venue allow candles? Some do, some don't. That's the question you want to ask. So, another good question, do you have a room that it would be exclusively for the bride when she's waiting, when she's getting dressed, waiting for the ceremony to start? Do you have a room that would be for attendants? Do you have a room that would be for for the groom and his groomsmen? So those are some good questions you definitely want to ask before you decide on your particular wedding venue. All right. So the other good question is smoking. We know some people are really, smoking. That's taboo. There are people who still smoke. So you want to ask the facility, is there a smoking area, or what their policy is on smoking? Some facilities, and a lot of cities now are banning smoking, period. You just can't even smoke on the street. So you don't know, ask the question, is smoking permitted? If smoking is permitted, where is the smoking area so you can inform your guests who may smoke? All right, another good question, microphones. My oldest daughter and her husband, of course, were married outside in a park, a beautiful, beautiful park. They had to get permission from the city in order to use outside microphones because we had someone who played a Spanish guitar and there was a vocalist. This was all outside in a park. They had to get special permission. So that's another good question you want to ask. If you're going to do anything outside, can you have a DJ out there with music? Can you have someone out there singing? So those are questions you want to ask before you sign for your wedding venue. Another question you want to ask, is there a minimum or a maximum for the number of hours for the ceremony? You may have a quick ceremony. You may have one that's going to last for a pretty good period of time. Also, if you're going to have your reception there, you want to be really clear on what the hours are for the reception. And if you run over a little bit, would there be a penalty for running over? All right. The other question, can they give you any information or any leads or possibly a discount for hotels in the area? So if you have friends and family coming from out of town, they can give you you can give your friends and family some leads and maybe even give them some type of a group discount on hotels. So you can ask the individuals who actually are in charge of the venue, the wedding venue. All right, so the next one is rehearsal. So would you be able to you want to ask the question, can we use this facility? If I was to rent this facility, can I use it for rehearsal? And another question is, during the week, if I want to come back and kind of check some things out, is there someone here that I can check in with to actually come and look at the facility again prior to actually utilizing it? So what is your policy as it relates to custodial, taking the custodial needs? Do you have a custodial staff? Are we going to be expected to clean up our own, once we finish the wedding? Who's responsible for cleaning it up? Are we responsible, or do you have a custodial staff to clean up behind us? The other question you want to ask is there accommodations for parking? Suppose you have some elderly individuals who use disabled parking. You want to know, is there a location for disabled parking or just parking in general? You want to check out the parking area and find out if it's ample parking for the number of guests you're planning to have at the wedding. And the kitchen, this is a huge one. So especially if you're going to have your own caterer, you want to know if you are able to have access to the kitchen. If the answer is yes, because you're going to have your own caterer, go in and inspect the kitchen. Look around, make sure the kitchen is meeting your expectation in terms of cleanliness, having, the stove, the refrigerator, the freezers, I don't know. Because oftentimes especially if you're having a large wedding, you're going to be using the kitchen quite a bit. Your staff will be using the kitchen a lot, and you want to be able to tell them or have them come prior to the wedding and actually look at what's offered relative to the kitchen. So ask about access to the kitchen. That's critical. All right. So the other question you want to ask, this is kind of a bonus question, is, and sometimes we forget about this, outlets. So you're having someone come and do professional photography, music, etc. What about the outlets? Are there sufficient outlets? You want to definitely make sure you check out the outlets. Before you go, this is one thing I didn't mention, which is really important. Have a pencil and paper and a notepad so you can take notes. So you're not just talking and then later you get home and say, oh, I should have taken notes, or I should have had a pad and pencil with me, or a pen or whatever. And so you can take notes as you're getting information. That's really important. Another something that you want to do, this is not so much a question, but something that you should do, have a tape measure. When you go to the facilities, have a tape measure so you can measure various spaces. Maybe you want to bring in some tables or whatever else you want to, however else you want to utilize the space. But when you get home, if you don't have a tape measure, you can say, well, you know what, I just wonder if that'll really fit. Have your tape measure, that way you can measure. And when you go home, you're like, yeah, it's 25 inches, 30 inches, or whatever. And so without having to come back, double back. All right. So I think we've covered pretty much everything that we need to cover. But hopefully this has been some very insightful, useful tips for you. The other thing, wait a minute, before I finish with this, I was just thinking now, before you decide on a venue, ask questions. Make sure you're clear before you sign the contract. You might even tell them you want to think about it. Go take it home, take your contract home, have a family, a friend, somebody you trust, somebody with, some business sense, read it over. Any questions, anything that's outstanding, anything that's not clear to you, you want to make sure it's clear. What you don't want to do, what you want to avoid is the day of your wedding having a misunderstanding about what is written contractually, something you overlooked, or you were so excited about the facility that you didn't ask the right questions. So hopefully the information I've shared with you today on securing your wedding venue has been helpful. I know when I was helping my children, who are now adults, plan for their wedding, we went through every single step that I'm mentioning to you, all the questions. We asked all of these questions and even more questions. What I want to suggest to you is never feel like you haven't asked enough questions. Make sure communication is really, really important. You want to make sure that you and the individual who you're renting the venue from are on the same page. You're in agreement. So the day of your wedding will be memorable. It will be wonderful as you've planned it to be, and not confusion, misunderstanding, and all of that. So you want it to be a beautiful, beautiful, happy occasion. So I'll talk with you next time. I'm hoping this video was helpful. If so, like and subscribe. Check out the elegant jewelry and accessories for your wedding at my website, bridesjewelryshop.com. If you have any questions or any suggestions or any comments, I'd love to hear from you. For your chance to win one of my beautifully and personally designed wedding journals, simply comment below with your wedding date. I'm wishing you endless love. Bye-bye for now.